Welcome back, everyone, to the next installment of Ancient Mesopotamia, Portrait of a Dead Civilization. This is part 9. We're going to talk about the city in Mesopotamia. So there were early urbanizing tensions that led to the formation and shaping of Mesopotamian cities throughout history. We're going to talk about the early growth of cities, and finally, the typical structure, the makeup of a Mesopotamian city. So there's always been this tendency for people to group together into clusters, into cities. This often happened around water courses. You see this in the Nile Valley, in the Indus Valley, and in Mesopotamia. However, with this urbanization came this desire for those inside of the city to exercise power and influence over the areas and the people living around the city in close proximity. And this led to strong anti-urbanizing forces from those living around the city. And so this tension between urbanizing and anti-urbanizing forces shaped much of Mesopotamian history when it comes to the city and its development. Now, the early growth of the cities, so Oppenheim attributes early growth of cities in Mesopotamia to increased agricultural production, particularly in the south, as we're going to look at later on. Urbanization took place in the South. As we've discussed earlier, urbanization in the South developed, at least to some degree, centered on this irrigation farming because there was not enough rainfall under the 200 millimeter ISO height for rainfall farming to occur in the South. This required a type of irrigation farming, which required organization, structure, and of course, this type of structure, while more difficult to achieve, also resulted in increased agricultural production. And these two things, increasing structure and organization and the increase in agricultural production, led to the development and growth of early cities. This, of course, required fortification of the centers in which people lived, given these tensions, urbanizing and anti-urbanizing forces, and of course, having this sort of protection, this fortification in a center of power, led to further growth of the city. And then finally, this increased contact between the settled and the tribal areas was a catalyst not only to drive people into the city, but to at times entice them in, given what was going on inside of the city. So these three things, at least these three things, were early factors in the growth of Mesopotamian cities. So in southern Mesopotamia, an interesting feature is that cities formed quite close to one another, often within line of sight. Examples of this would be the cities of Eridu or Larsa and Uruk. So what did the typical Mesopotamian city look like? Well, the Sumerian word for city is Uru, Akkadian Alam. The rule was there was an enclosing wall. Of course, this was not required for a Mesopotamian city, but it was extraordinarily common. Cities were built along waterways, which, for obvious reasons, considering the importance of water to the life of a city. And of course, water courses shifted, which had to be accounted for, and there are grave consequences for the shifting of water courses when it comes to a city built along its path. An Akitu shrine, a New Year's shrine, was constructed usually with a sacred path leading to it, and it was constructed along a waterway. If you'd like to know more about the Akitu shrine and the festival associated with it, we have a video about that as a daily data. See the link below in the description. There are 3 parts to a typical Mesopotamian city. The first is the city proper. This was the walled area that contained the palace and the temple and the homes of the royal family and the high officials. Then there was the outer city, which encompassed the other houses, the farms, the fields, all the areas where the natural resources for the city were gleaned. And then finally the harbor, known as the Karum, Kar in Sumerian. This was the commercial district, or the place where commercial activity took place, and this is where foreign traders would reside. And of course there are very popular Karums. Karam Kanish is one, the Old Assyrian period. And again, we have a video about this in the Daily Data playlist if you would like to see it. So in summation, there was a tension that existed between urbanizing and anti-urbanizing forces, and this shaped the history and development of Mesopotamian cities. Cities grew because of increased agricultural production, settlement fortification, and continuous contact with the surrounding people groups. Cities generally consisted of a walled center, an outer city, and a commercial district. So that's a very brief look at a typical Mesopotamian city, how they developed, the impetus for development, how they initially grew, and what a typical Mesopotamian city looked like. Tomorrow we're going to begin to look at urbanism in Mesopotamia and some of the forces that led to urbanism in this region. Until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?